few months back, I, a 28-year-old man, got engaged to my 3-year girlfriend, a 26-year-old woman. 2 days ago, we were scheduled to be married. Before we were engaged, my girlfriend was a normal and attractive laid-back person. But as soon as she put the ring on her finger, she became this demanding and belligerent person who would not listen to anything I said. She designed the whole wedding and ignored any of my suggestions. She invited everyone she wanted, including my guests, even very elderly acquaintances of mine who hadn't talked to me in decades. She insisted that everyone who had ever known me should be invited, even though I advised her multiple times not to invite them since it would just be embarrassing for everyone engaged. Eventually, anticipating that once we were married her new side of herself would resurface, I simply gave up trying and let her do whatever she pleased. According to my acquaintance, who first brought me to her, she had always struggled with control, even before I met her. Nothing this horrible had me imagining. She had to be the one controlling the show at all times. Everything she said had to happen, or else she would spiral insane over it. Love drove me to handle it for the few weeks before the wedding without saying anything. She then did something utterly unforgivable, though. My fiancé asked about my sister as we were compiling a guest list. I was surprised as, a few months into our relationship, I had obviously told her that I had not heard from my sister 10 years ago and had not contacted her. That is how I wanted it. 6 months into the marriage, she had seen the several family pictures on the walls and visited my family. Of course, she asked me who the exact female matching me was in all of my early pictures. I had to talk about my estranged twin sister. Growing up, my sister and I had not been friends despite how content we seemed in photos for our parents. We'd argued over every small detail behind the scenes. We really loathed each other and always attempted to one-up one another. It was not even the adorable little sibling rivalry most people envision. This competition continued until I passed her on my SATs in high school. Furious, she turned away from me for days following. Though little did I know the worst was still to come, I felt I had permanently beaten her once. Since both my sister and I were straight A students when it came time to find out which universities we had been admitted into, we anticipated being accepted anywhere we applied. Yale first appealed to me. Hers was Princeton. Thinking I wouldn't want to wind up at Princeton, I hadn't even given application any thought. But my buddies persuaded me to apply at the last minute, and I made a big fuss about not applying to Princeton. When I did apply, I said nothing about it as it would have been embarrassing to break my word. My sister entered Columbia, but not Princeton, while I eventually admitted into both Yale and Princeton. She had discussed attending Princeton since her senior year began, so this was somewhat devastating for her. Since I was not visiting Princeton, I intended to keep my admittance there under wraps. Although my parents most likely discovered out and chose to throw us a surprise party, I wanted no more turmoil. When my sister spotted Princeton on my cake at the party, she laughed and claimed I had destroyed her life. Although I attempted to tell her I had no idea she wouldn't get accepted, given our past, she found it difficult to trust me. She walked out in tears after a time. My parents voiced their annoyance at our continuous arguments and our desire for both growth as adults. I decided to follow their counsel and went to speak with her. Most visitors had fled following her outburst. It was dark outside. Not seeing her, I yelled her name. I suddenly felt something firm strike the rear of my skull and fell. My wrist wrapped, I woke up in a hospital room. It was dislocated since my sister had waited outside for me and struck me in the head with a shovel. Subsequently, she walked on my wrist. It still astounds me. Though I disagreed with my sister, I could never picture being this insane. I let it go. My parents persuaded me not to file charges. Following that occurrence, I never saw my sister once more or inquired of my parents about her. I have no idea where she finally landed or what college she attended. My parents sent her off. I never asked where. They stayed in contact with her, but I wasn't offended. I knew it was for her benefit. I started college after recovering and was judged fit by physicians, but I lagged far behind and battled with my grades. Because of my head damage, I also suffered regular migraines that brought back memories of what my sister had done in a flash of wrath. That year was emotionally unsettling. I went to therapy to feel like myself once more, 10 years later, and I have carried on with my life. Nobody else in the family, even my parents, never discussed my sister. Assuming that would cut off the conversation, I replied we were not inviting her when my fiancé inquired about her. Though I hadn't told her specifically what had transpired, I felt that her understanding should be sufficient given our non-communication in more than 10 years. She ought to have respected it, but she began hounding me and stopped only for several days. I would call off the entire wedding until I snapped at her and warned her that if she brought my sister up one more, then I would cancel. That appeared to quiet her for a bit. 2 days later, on our wedding day, though, I discovered what she had done behind my back. Awaiting my fiancé to walk down the aisle, I was standing before the pastor. The bride started walking when the music began. It was at this point that I saw my sister among them strolling arm in arm with one of my friends, looking as perplexed as I felt. Even my sister seemed somewhat lost. For a few seconds I was stunned and totally clueless about what was happening. At last my fiancé walked down the aisle looking quite content and grinning broadly. But I felt just rage and mistrust. Nothing else. Knowing this was her doing, I couldn't believe she would have pulled anything like this, on our wedding day, no less. I was utterly blindsided. Of course, I didn't feel especially emotional, and most of my guests could understand why I had a terrible look on my face as my bride was approaching me. I did not squander a second when she was at last standing across from me, still sporting that smile. I asked her why my sister was there when I had clearly instructed her not to invite her under any circumstances. She informed me she wanted to get married first and did not want to have that conversation. Clearly, though, it was not going to happen, not anymore. We should so discuss this right now, I told her. She said she had been able to convince my parents to provide her my sister's address and contact details by telling them I had been discussing wanting to reconcile with her before getting married. She informed me she had worked very hard to persuade them, so she might surprise me. Though she had no knowledge of what had really transpired 10 years earlier, she even dared to declare that she felt it was about time we healed with our past. Our guests waited while we were up there, debating back and forth for about 5 minutes. At last I saw that there was no reason in trying to preserve our connection anymore. I was done and had no one to interact with this woman. I therefore turned away. She called for me to come back, but I ignored her and carried on walking till I arrived at my car. I then got behind the wheel and continued till nightfall. I decided to sleep in my car as I couldn't find any nice hotels nearby. Deliberately, I canceled everything on the phone in the evening and ignored all the calls and messages from my fiancé and family. Fortunately, I had enough petrol to get back home the following day. But I chose to stay in a hotel instead as soon as I spotted my fiancé's car in the driveway. 2 days have gone by and I have not answered any of the texts or calls from my fiancé. Although my parents have also been attempting to reach me, right now I am not troubled by them. To be honest, I fell for my fiancé's lies and could not even imagine they were dumb enough to consider ever suggesting reconciliation with my sister. The least they could have done was ask me whether this was what I wanted. But they decided to think this was the kind of surprise I would have preferred for my wedding. Most of all, what she did has me really enraged with my fiancé. She had no right to sneak behind my back, control my parents, then bring my sister, who I had not seen in 10 years, to our wedding. She had produced a tremendous tangle of ideas, none of which would have occurred had she just followed what I had suggested. She sent me a fairly lengthy text a few hours ago, explaining how she had only learned what had actually transpired all those years ago from my parents yesterday after I left the wedding. She stated she should have listened to me when I mentioned I wanted my sister at our wedding and apologized for blindsiding me. She also said that she had gotten an earful from all of my parents and friends, who were enraged that she had done something of this kind. She also said, though, that she felt I should have brought up the circumstances of my great falling out with my sister and the precise reason I stopped talking to her. She wouldn't have invited her then. Not least of all, I disagree with that. Though I shouldn't have to spell everything for her, maybe that would have helped. For me, it was a terrible recollection, hence I avoid discussing it. She should have also believed me when I informed her I wanted my sister nowhere close by. She should have realized that it was a terrible period for me. Nobody simply shuts off their sister for 10 years without a good cause. I would have told her perhaps someday in the future, but until then she might have simply accepted my word for it. Clearly, I am not getting married to her anymore. I'm not sure, though, whether I should also apologize to her. I'm not especially sorry about it. If anything, she ought to be the one apologizing without pointing me blame. What then do you folks believe? Is it me the jerk for not informing my fiancé exactly why I would have cut off all those years ago? Review 1. I have 3 days now of residence in the motel. I guess I was correct not to apologize. I posted my query yesterday and am back to neglecting her. Still, I did chat to my mother this morning. She told me she was really sorry for what had occurred and that she should have known I would never want my sister around. It was strange and tense. She told me that my fiancé had contacted them a few weeks ago and had essentially been trying to persuade them for weeks before they decided to share my sister's details. Since she wanted it to be a surprise, my fiancé had also pushed them into promising her they wouldn't talk to me about it. Looking back, they do believe that their choice was dumb. That they came to see that and later apologized for it makes me happy. Since I'm somewhat conflicted about my emotions right now, I'm not sure whether I feel like forgiving them just now. Yet eventually I suppose I will forgive them, just not right now. In a few days I'm coming back home, but I have to make sure my fiancé isn't there when I get back. She will obviously be the one leaving since the house is really mine. More than she deserves anyway. I will give her ample time to pack and head out. I am honestly relieved. This relationship is clearly gone now. 2 updates. Few days back, I advised my fiancé to leave the house right away and give her 5 days to do so. Today is the 6th day. I returned to my house thinking she would be gone by now, as she contacted me back stating she will move out by today. Her waiting for me in the living room surprised me. I fell for her very deft parking her car somewhere else so that I would believe she was gone. Seeing her there infuriated me, and I told her I just wasn't in the mood to talk about anything right now. True to nature, my fiancé ignored what I was saying and began raving about how she had been worried sick for the past few days, and that I should have at least told her where I was. For some reason, my fiancé had merely thought that, in spite of all that had transpired, we could just resume our relationship and continue from where we had left off, as if she had stopped a game or something. She kept talking and informed me that it was somewhat embarrassing of my part not letting her in on the whole matter with my sister. She even accused me of hiding from her facts that might have put her in danger since she had come to see my sister. I went crazy at that point. Her boldness in even suggesting that this was my fault astounded me. We were over, so I told her straightforwardly to get the hell out of my house at that minute. She looked a little shocked. She probably took everything I said very casually, hence she didn't see this approaching. Tears were no longer going to affect me, so she tried to fight with me and appeared ready to cry. I simply could not stand her, hence she had to leave at that second. Her voice was driving me mad. I could not handle her garbage anymore. She should opt for permanent departure. She started crying then and there, so I suppose I must have connected with her. I left her screaming while I entered my bedroom and closed myself in to nap, so emotionally tired I didn't even attempt comforting her. I have to have been asleep for some time since my fiancé vanished and the outside was dark when I woke up. She would have returned later to pick her belongings, but for now I am alone and have some time to consider and organize all that has happened this week. 3. Update. My fiancé departed 3 days ago, but she has been phoning me every single day since she cannot face the reality that we are done yet. I feel a little bad for her even though I am not responding to any of them. Regarding my parents, they visited by yesterday and sincerely apologies for whatever transpired, assigning all the guilt on themselves. After that incident, they sent her away to an anger issues rehabilitation center, where she spent several months undergoing treatment and intensive therapy since her mental problems were obviously far more severe than mine. Finally, I also asked them what my sister had been up to all these years. She started college once she was cleared but had to find an apartment where she lived alone. On the weekends, my folks would pay her visits. After that, she seemed a lot more normal and consistent. She even began working around my same schedule. She had her own business and lived somewhat outside of town for the past 7 years, which was okay, I suppose. They also told me that my sister seemed to know she had created this after I left the ceremony and left right away apologizing to our parents for showing up. She looked so perplexed since, apparently, my fiancé had informed her this was only a rehearsal and not the actual wedding, yet it all felt very real to her. After they went, I finally opened and read the letter my parents also gave me, that written by my sister. After an hour since then, I still find myself broken. She assured me she would change and had apologized for every single thing she had put me through both in childhood and then as a teen. Her statements now appeared full of remorse about how we could have been the best of friends, but are only sour strangers instead. She said that I would forgive her eventually and that we would have a real chance at being the kind of siblings people would want us to be, even though her violent streak made her not hopeful for a timely reconciliation. Reading that made me cry, and I suppose I wish the same thing. I'll give myself some time to consider it. Maybe if I feel ready for it, I will forgive her someday, as I used to be rather nasty to her as a child too. For now, I just want to reconstruct my life and concentrate on enhancing my mental state, since the last several months have truly worn me out. To block her and go on with my life once and for once, honestly, I'm just waiting for my fiancé to come and pick back her belongings. I am simply done. I believe I have had enough drama for a